Did you realize that across the United States, certain states have begun to erect legal barriers so formidable that immigrants, both documented and undocumented, find themselves systematically driven out or deterred from settling in those regions? It may sound at odds with America's reputation as a land of opportunity, but in the past few years, a wave of legislation has swept across state capitals, emboldening local police to act as quasi-immigration officers, restricting municipalities from declaring themselves safe havens, and levying heavy penalties on businesses that hire anyone without federal work authorization. The result is a patchwork of enforcement regimes so aggressive that entire communities ask their immigrant neighbors to flee or face arrest, and families hesitate to even send their children to school. In the sections that follow, we'll tour the 10 states that have most strictly clamped down on immigration. For each, you'll see exactly which laws were passed, how large their immigrant populations are, the economic sectors most affected, and the real-world consequences for individuals and local businesses. Every time we move from one state to the next, its name will be prominently displayed, so you always know precisely where you are in the discussion. Whether you're an immigrant weighing your options, an employer relying on migrant labor, or simply someone who cares about the future of our nation, these stories will reveal just how far some leaders will go to shield their borders from newcomers, sometimes at immense human and economic cost. Ready to dive in? Let's begin. Idaho, often conjured in the national imagination as the rugged gem state with its postcard-perfect mountains and sprawling potato farms, has quietly emerged as one of the fiercest enforcers of anti-immigration policy. In 2024, the Idaho legislature approved Senate Bill 1188, granting sheriffs and police chiefs the power to detain anyone suspected of lacking lawful presence. Under this law, officers may hold individuals for up to 48 hours while awaiting confirmation of their status by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. That authority, previously reserved for federal agents, effectively deputizes local law enforcement as immigration enforcers. The state's foreign-born population stands at roughly 5.7%, about 112,000 residents out of 1.9 million. Many of these immigrants work in agriculture and food processing, driving Idaho's renowned potato, dairy, and produce industries. Yet, the specter of checkpoints and detentions has sent tremors through farm communities from the Snake River Valley to southwestern packing plants. A simple traffic stop for a burned-out headlight can escalate into a night in a county jail, prompting fear that deters even documented green card holders from traveling beyond their neighborhoods. Several municipalities, including Eagle and Post Falls, have declared themselves non-sanctuary cities, formally banning any local policy that bars cooperation with ICE. Supporters frame these measures as essential to defending the rule of law and protecting public safety, citing drug trafficking and human smuggling concerns along the Idaho-Washington border. Critics counter that the law's chilling effect undermines trust between police and immigrant communities, driving victims of domestic violence or labor exploitation into the shadows rather than toward help. Economists warn that the tightening grip on immigration could backfire. Seasonal workers may seek employment in neighboring states like Washington or Oregon, leaving fields unharvested and factories understaffed. Local grocery prices could rise, and the state's economic growth may slow, all in the name of a policy that many see as an overreach of authority into areas traditionally managed by the federal government. Arkansas's foray into stringent immigration enforcement began in earnest in 2019, when Governor Asa Hutchinson signed legislation slashing state grants to any city or county that refused to honor ICE detainer requests. With approximately 5.3% of its population, about 162,000 people, foreign-born, Arkansas is far from a major immigrant hub, but its poultry plants, livestock farms, and food processing facilities rely heavily on migrant workers. The law effectively penalizes local agencies that would otherwise protect undocumented residents, making them choose between upholding federal immigration mandates or losing up to 5% of their annual operating budget, which often funds fire departments and emergency services. In practice, this has prompted several smaller cities to adopt zero-tolerance policies, processing detainer requests at first contact and discouraging any form of sanctuary. Advocates of the policy argue that cooperation with federal authorities is crucial to deterring crime and preserving limited public resources. But detractors point out that the measure undermines community policing. Undocumented residents are now far less likely to report crimes for fear of deportation, and entire neighborhoods, even those with legal residence, have grown distrustful of local law enforcement. Immigrant support organizations have documented cases where parents pulled their children from public schools rather than risk an ID check, and where church attendance plummeted out of fear. Economic fallout has not been hypothetical. In late 2021, a major poultry processing plant near Springdale shuttered its overnight shift after dozens of undocumented workers fled the region amid rumors of enforcement sweeps. The shutdown cost the company millions in lost production and sparked a scramble for temporary labor that drove up costs for retailers. This incident underscored a cruel irony. By attempting to curb unauthorized immigration, Arkansas legislators endangered the very industries that keep their rural communities afloat. Arizona's restrictive posture on immigration became legendary, with the 2010 passage of SB 1070 often referred to as the "Show Me Your Papers" law. Although the U.S. Supreme Court struck down several of its key provisions in 2012, citing concerns over racial profiling, SB 1070's core allowance for police to verify immigration status during any lawful stop, given reasonable suspicion, survived. Today, over 13% of Arizona's population, more than 900,000 residents, were born abroad, contributing significantly to agriculture in Yuma, construction in Phoenix, and the service sector on tribal reservations. Yet Arizona continues to expand enforcement. In 2022, the legislature passed HB 2562, requiring state and local agencies to verify citizenship for nearly all new hires and funneling millions of dollars in contract revenue exclusively to firms that self-certify compliance with immigration laws. Proponents hail these policies as necessary steps to secure the border and protect American jobs, often pointing to the state's position on the front line of U.S.-Mexico crossings. Opponents argue they foster a climate of suspicion, erode civil liberties, and alienate the Latino community, which comprises nearly 30% of Arizona's residents. Reports persist of waiters in Phoenix asking diners for proof of U.S. citizenship before seating them, of technicians refusing service calls to rural homes with Spanish-speaking occupants, and of caregivers avoiding counties where detainer requests have surged. The economic implications are stark: a shortage of pickers in the winter citrus harvest, a slowdown in border town tourism after news of sweeps went viral, and a chilling effect on the tech sector's ability to attract international talent. Arizona thus exemplifies the tensions that arise when state leaders take immigration enforcement into their own hands, balancing security ambitions against the very vibrancy that immigrant communities bring. In 2011, South Carolina enacted SB 20, a law closely modeled on Arizona's SB 1070. It requires officers to check immigration status during any lawful stop and prohibits local jurisdictions from limiting cooperation with ICE. Although parts of the law, such as those making it a state crime to be undocumented, were struck down on constitutional grounds, its fundamental detainer provisions remain active. Today, roughly 5.9% of South Carolinians, about 316,000 people, are foreign-born, working in manufacturing hubs around Greenville, luxury resorts along Hilton Head Island, and agricultural operations in the Lowcountry. Yet under SB 20, local officials can face state sanctions if they fail to honor ICE detainers, making municipalities reluctant to adopt any sanctuary-style protections. Advocates claim the law deters criminal activity and saves taxpayer money by ensuring ICE picks up individuals wanted on federal immigration violations. Critics counter that the policy creates a two-tier justice system. Minor offenses like jaywalking or expired tags can trigger detainment, while serious crimes remain underreported in immigrant communities, wary of any contact with police. Non-profits, Serving victims of domestic violence report a 25% drop in calls, attributing it to fear of deportation. Economically, South Carolina's booming industries struggle with a paradox. The same textile mills and tourism ventures that rely on immigrant workers now warn of labor gaps. In 2022, 2 large chicken processing plants reported temporary layoffs after rumors of ICE raids spooked employees, underscoring how enforcement policies can boomerang, hurting both businesses and communities that depend on migrant labor. Tennessee joined the crackdown in mid-2024 with the passage of SB 2576, which empowers law enforcement to verify immigration status during arrests or any lawful detention. Similar to Alabama's HB 56, the law requires local jails to check detainees' documentation and report undocumented individuals to ICE or face civil penalties. Approximately 6.1% of Tennesseans, around 412,000 people, were born outside the U.S., working in fields as diverse as agriculture in West Tennessee, automotive assembly near Chattanooga, and hospitality in Nashville. SB 2576's broad language means that routine traffic stops for speeding or broken headlights can escalate into immigration checks, heightening the risk of racial profiling and mistaken identity. Lawmakers justified the measure by citing an estimated $364 per Tennessee household in costs associated with illegal immigration. However, civil rights groups denounced the figure as misleading, noting that many immigrants, documented and undocumented, pay sales and property taxes without claiming benefits. Meanwhile, local hospitals report declines in prenatal visits among Hispanic mothers for fear of being flagged, potentially endangering maternal and child health. Businesses also express anxiety. A landscaping firm in Knoxville cut its workforce by 30%, rather than risk hefty fines for employing undocumented labor. The law's unintended economic fallout illustrates the delicate balance states must strike when they venture into immigration enforcement, a realm traditionally managed by the federal government. In 2011, Alabama's HB 56 stunned the nation by imposing one of the strictest state-level immigration regimes ever seen. It required schools to verify students' residency status, criminalized harboring undocumented immigrants, and obliged law enforcement to check immigration status during any lawful stop. Federal courts later enjoined many aggressive provisions, but key elements remain on the books. With just 4% of its population, roughly 203,000 people, foreign-born, Alabama is not a major immigration destination, yet its poultry farms, steel mills, and construction sites rely on that labor. Within months of HB 56's enactment, a Springdale chicken plant lost over half its workforce, leading to temporary closures that rippled through grocery store supply chains. In Birmingham, Catholic Charities reported a 60% drop in clinic visits from Hispanic families, many avoiding all public institutions to lower their risk of detainment. Proponents maintain HB 56 enforces federal law and protects jobs for legal residents. Opponents describe it as a collateral cruelty, separating families and compromising public safety by discouraging immigrants from reporting crimes. Years after its passage, Alabama continues to navigate these consequences. Hospitals and schools struggle with fluctuating enrollments, and community leaders seek ways to rebuild trust in areas hardest hit by the law's fallout. In 2022, West Virginia enacted a law banning sanctuary cities and authorizing local authorities to enforce all federal immigration statutes. Although fewer than 2% of West Virginians, only about 28,000 people, are foreign-born, the state saw fit to bolster enforcement through county sheriff's offices. The rationale: prevent human trafficking and drug smuggling by enhancing local cooperation with ICE. Yet the state's population has been declining for decades due to an aging workforce and youth out-migration. Immigrant labor, though small in number, plays an outsized role in healthcare and construction, filling vital positions in rural hospitals and highway projects. With enforcement ramped up, some hospitals near Morgantown have reported difficulties maintaining nursing staff as foreign-trained nurses reconsider relocations to more welcoming states. Supporters champion the law as a safeguard for limited public resources. Critics warn that, in West Virginia's case, the policy is more symbolic than practical, penalizing a tiny population segment while exacerbating workforce shortages. Whether the state's leaders will adjust their stance in light of these economic strains remains an open question. Texas has long been on the front lines of immigration policy, owing to its shared border with Mexico and its sizable immigrant workforce. In 2017, the state passed SB 4, which outlawed sanctuary cities and compelled local agencies to comply with ICE detainer requests, under threat of substantial fines. By 2022, Governor Greg Abbott escalated enforcement with Operation Lone Star, deploying state troopers and the National Guard to arrest migrants crossing the Rio Grande. He then chartered buses in 2023 and 2024 to send asylum seekers to Democratic-leaning cities in other states, igniting a political firestorm. Over 17% of Texans, around 5.1 million residents, are foreign-born, from sugarcane fields in the Rio Grande Valley to Silicon Prairie startups in Austin. The combined effect of SB 4 and Operation Lone Star has strained the state's budget, costing billions in enforcement, and driven a wedge between border and non-border communities, each with their own economic and security concerns. Advocates for tough enforcement cite national security and job protection. Opponents highlight constitutional issues, the separation of powers, and the astronomical public expense of buzzing migrants out of state. Texas thus stands as a vivid example of how far a state can push enforcement, even to the point of clashing with federal law and fueling an interstate political crisis. Though often associated with cornfields and presidential caucuses, Iowa surprised many observers in 2023 by banning sanctuary cities altogether. Under the new law, local governments risk losing up to 5% of their state funding if they refuse to honor ICE detainer requests. With a foreign-born population of around 5.9%, some 189,000 residents, immigrants are essential to Iowa's agriculture, ethanol production, and food processing. Yet the sanctuary city ban immediately triggered labor shortages in hog farms and ethanol plants in western counties, as workers opted for neighboring states perceived as more welcoming. Proponents argue the measure levels the legal playing field, ensuring all law enforcement agencies uphold federal mandates. Critics counter that the policy is a short-sighted, punitive measure that alienates valuable workers and undermines public safety by eroding trust between immigrant communities and police. As local elections approach, sheriffs and mayors across Iowa must choose between defending their residents' need for sanctuary or risking deep budget cuts. Finally, Florida's Senate Bill 1718, enacted in July 2024, marks one of the newest and most far-reaching state laws targeting undocumented workers. It imposes hefty fines and potential license revocations for businesses that knowingly employ anyone unable to prove federal work authorization. With over 5 million foreign-born residents, 21% of the state's population, Florida's economy hinges on immigrant labor in tourism, hospitality, agriculture, and healthcare. Theme parks in Orlando, cruise lines in Miami, and citrus groves in the central counties all depend on seasonal and year-round migrant workers. SB 1718's requirement that every new hire be verified through E-Verify goes beyond federal mandates, and a single paperwork error can trigger devastating fines for high-volume employers, prompting widespread fears of audits. Supporters claim the law curbs illegal immigration and protects jobs for legal residents. Opponents warn it will drive businesses underground, sap the workforce, and raise consumer prices. Already, some farms in the Everglades region report unharvested crops, resort staffing agencies struggle to fill positions, and medical clinics serving immigrant populations see declining patient loads. Florida's move underscores a growing trend. States, once content to let the federal government handle immigration, are stepping into the breach, sometimes with policies that upend local economies, disrupt family life, and test the boundaries of state versus federal authority.